I would introduce the idea of Wetopia and how you can bring Wetopia into practice for climate and nature-based solutions. Or to put it in the bold way, like you see, no nature-based solutions, no NBS without Wetopia. Since 5 years, I'm living in Marseille and working worldwide as a social designer and facilitator of co-creation projects in neighborhoods of cities. And I'm also an expert in participatory policies and equality, especially in evaluating European projects on NBS. But, and that was a mean mentioning normally, is that I'm indeed also a former deputy mayor in Genk, where I combined neighborhood development, participation, and environmental policies. And in this role, I remember very well, I sat together in Brussels with Marcus, Katrien, Peter, Chebon, and others at the very first meeting to build this great project, Connecting Nature, and prepare an application for the European Commission. And now, 6 years later, I'm of course very thankful for being back and see all the great work that has been done. And to share today an approach, a way of thinking and doing, I like to call Wetopia, making cities together, as a means to provoke climate solutions, as a means to make nature-based solutions possible, carried by humans in cities, and of course with the full consciousness that we are part of nature. And this is something, and I want to go a little step to regenerative development manifesto, because I started to deeply understand this as a regenerative design and development practitioner. And this manifesto tells a lot about how we honor the complexity of living systems and that we can't make compromises, but have nature itself as the genius leading us. And the only appropriate response, I think, and a lot with me, is a local response. The work of regenerating the world's natural systems can only succeed in particular places, in particular cities, neighborhoods, using approaches that are created in response to the unique processes of life in those places. And before I dive into Wetopia, I want to emphasize two statements in our manifesto, which are very relevant, I think. And the first one is that nature doesn't need our protection. She needs our collaboration. Because we all, how should I say, we all have our cliches. When we hear terms like ecological resilience, we think of untouched ecosystems, like, for example, a rainforest. And then we try to think about our roles for humans when we think of this rainforest, and we limit our aspiration to this conservation and protection of those places who are fewer and fewer, these untouched places that remain. But what if nature needs humans, not only to protect it from ourselves, of course, but also to play a creative, hands-on, an active role in nature. And another statement I want to talk about is that everyone has a role. We believe that everyone has to commit to change, not just in what we do, of course, but also in who we are and how we think. I give you an example. Landowners, for example, must commit themselves to deeply understand their lands, how it works, and what's the potential as a catalyst for the ecological, but also social health and economic health of the area it's surrounding. Whether the land is owned by a farm or a school or a municipality or a private ranch or an apartment complex, Another example, community leaders must stop looking for solutions to import as best practices. In regenerative design, we don't really believe in best practices because we think there's no sustainable future for communities that have nothing unique to contribute to the world. So what the community has to offer is important and is very unique and has to do with its natural capital. So I wanted to share with you some of these points from the manifesto because I think this is really the spirit in which we work with Wetopia. And Wetopia is, of course, much more than me. First of all, there is my colleague Kevin, which you see here, who is a community architect based in South Africa, but also many citizens, activists, artists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, urban planners, and so on, and from all over the world. I must say we are a growing global community of practice. And as you heard, all types of roles are represented. And we see in every city a lot of top-down approaches to changing cities, also on nature-based solutions, to strengthen these cities, to improve these cities from their inhabitants and users, but still top-down. And for us, this approach has never been the right way to tackle the challenges we want to see. For us, the right way is more like this bottom-up approach of Wetopia, making cities together. And I would like to show you this picture when you find one of our Wetopia teams, this one in Cape Town in South Africa, and we worked 6 months together. And yeah, let me just tell you who you see on the picture. So I start at the back with the woman in the purple dress. This is Bridget, and she's the right hand of the mayor of Cape Town. Then you see a glimpse of Ellen. She's an entrepreneur in tech. Then you see the guy with the red cap. It's Mpo, an activist, and he's squatting illegally a nursery with 900 people who live there at V&A Waterfront, so homeless people who squatted this nursery. Then you see the young guy, Sia, 19 years old, an entrepreneur in the township of Langa, leading hikes on Table Mountain. Marjorie, she's a retired design professor. Next to Marjorie, you see Helen, a politician, the councillor of Kensington, which is a suburb of Cape Town. Then you see Colissa, a city maker and community gardener in the township of Khayelitsha. Henry, the marketing manager of the Victoria and Albert waterfront. And finally, Lu Wen, a civil servant working on environmental topics. And I just wanted to show you this and to show you what Wetopia looks like. So why do we need Wetopia for climate solutions? And there are some reasons, there are many reasons, but I just give you some. I think we all agree that real change happens in cities at the local level in a specific context of place. And that's why we need more participation, better democratic models. We are also all change makers, not only politicians and civil servants, but also citizens, entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, activists. All these roles are important to develop, for example, nature-based solutions in cities. In many cities, we also need to find new ways to fight segregation between people and places. And that's where Wetopia comes in, because we want to make these links, these new alliances. There's also a need for more together in a polarized world, for more us, for more we. In Marseille, we see créer du nous, creating us, to make people meet and talk again. Also, people who never are connected. We want people to stay connected or to get connected in our cities. And last but not least, but very important, there's so much knowledge and experience and creativity in our local society that we should make use of it as much as possible. And I like to tell my story with this visual, because too often we hide under the umbrella politicians keep open for us. Because, of course, many of us think that politicians have to solve everything. And sometimes, unfortunately, politicians give the impression that they can solve everything. But of course, that's overestimated. Politicians can no longer solve our problems and challenges on their own and take care of us. And that's why in Wetopia, we turn the umbrella around and we step into this boat, let's say, Wetopia boat, to create a better future for our cities. And this also means that we take control of our different roles. And I like to call this, you see it at the right hand in this slide, I like to call this the 21st century activism. We don't just say what we want to change by protests or words. And I must say, living in France, we are very good in this. And we don't want to wait for the government, but we want to act ourselves. And that's what we call the 21st century activism. It doesn't mean that something wrong with the 20th century activism, but Wetopia fully embraces the 21st century activism. So what is Wetopia, to resume? And I'm going to do a little trip with you to several countries, and I will talk a little bit about this later. But to resume, Wetopia creates new alliances between people who don't usually meet. Wetopia creates a common space for collaboration. Wetopia can also be planted in people's minds everywhere and on any subject, of course, also on nature-based solutions. Wetopia always starts from the potential of place. It's in the place that everything is happening. And Wetopia is, of course, for committed people who take the initiative from their own role. And how do we do this? We do this through, let's say, communities of practice, in which we try to inject this mindset and locally bring Wetopians together to inspire others and to create projects and interventions together that fit in the context of the specific city. And let me take you to Cape Town, for example. I already talked about Bridget, so the lady who makes the victory sign. She's the right hand of the mayor of Cape Town, and Paul, the man in the red cap, who is the leader of an illegal occupation at the V&A waterfront. And in real life, they are in a very, very polarized situation, of course. But Wetopia's neutral position has allowed them to work together. And we created this neutral place with Open Design Africa. And you will see this in my story over and over again, like a cultural platform, a cultural organization really works very well with Wetopia. We like to work with them because there's some kind of independent platform in which we can work with all kind of partners. And in Cape Town, it started with a 2 days workshop with 100 inhabitants of a township, Langa, and a suburb, Kensington. And in this so-called Citizen G100, we worked around one question: how can we challenge the perception of our communities? How can we change the narrative? Because a lot of social and entrepreneurial innovation, also on NBS, is taking place in these neighborhoods, but it's not recognized enough as such. So many concepts for small and large interventions came out of these workshops, and we used them as cases to a learning program for policymakers, for change makers. And for this, we invited 5 people from the communities, Lanka and Kensington, 5 people related to local government, and also 5 city makers for a 6-day exchange spread over 6 months. And the aim was to work together through a design process using the cases from this G100 and to get into the field and develop a project with local people and city officials. And by doing this, we created new utopians around concrete local groups and projects. And most of the projects, and we see this all the time in Wetopia, were related to greening the city and also to waste. So we helped the participants to work together from their different roles to develop the potential of this township and suburb in relation to the place. Let's go to Marseille, for example. Here in this picture, you see students from the Catch Business School, and they're in front of the door of the Beaumet prison in Marseille after a workshop with a group of young prisoners. Of course, we couldn't take a picture inside. We couldn't take our phones with us, but we made this picture after this workshop. And this is again a great example of working together in new alliances. People who would never meet prisoners and business school students, but they collaborate on how they see their city, because that's what they have in common, their city, their age, and how they see their city greener, more accessible, more innovative. So the Wetopia project we carried out in Marseille was Le Tour de tous les possibles as part of Manifesta 13 Marseille, the art biennial. Manifesta took place also before in Genk. That was Manifesta number 9. So in different workshops, we brought together hundreds of Marseille residents from all walks of life in new alliances, and we invented new solutions, new possibles for the city. And I must say that Green and Clean Marseille was one of the main topics. So participants, as you see here, they want zero voiture, so no cars. They want local grown food, and they also want places of silence, for example. So many ideas since then, since 2020, were put into practice by the participants, by the network of organizations, but also by the local government of Marseille. Let's go to Nairobi. This is Matare. I already told you it can be planted everywhere in the world. And Matare is the largest slum in sub-Saharan Africa. It's near Nairobi in Kenya. And we worked as a laboratory with residents, energy activists, policymakers, energy companies, and scientists on this question. So together we empathized with the neighborhoods and its inhabitants to create a dialogue in which the focus is not on the problem, but on the potential of those who live here and with the place Matare. So we did this in collaboration also with the Living Lab Nairobi of the university's Design Institute. Again, a so-called cultural platform we work with. And also a good example of working on potential of place in a Wetopia project we did last summer in Oostende, and it was called De Grote Invitatie. In English, you could say The Grand Invitation. As many of you know, Oostende is a city on the Belgian coast with climate challenges, of course. And we explored with the inhabitants the potential of 3 neighborhoods for major challenges such as urban development, but also climate, in a series of open-air conversations under a tree. And I must say, it's so nice to do this. I could recommend this, of course, when the weather is not so good, it's not easy, but in summer, even in the north of Europe, why not do these open conversations under trees? And the 10 citizens, developers, inhabitants are also chosen according to their different roles in this neighborhood. For example, an entrepreneur, a civil servant living in this neighborhood, an artist, an activist. For example, we had a social tenant, a shopkeeper, all people who live in this neighborhood. And together they took up the challenge for a few weeks in this grand invitation. And here again, we did this on a cultural platform, the Festival of Architecture. And the group formulated the roles of their neighborhood for the city and developed many projects and concepts to make their roles work. Here, for example, you see at the left-hand side the role of the knowledge of the sea. Because when we think of the knowledge of the sea and we have it vlis in Ostende, then of course we think of scientists. But also fishermen and surfers, for example, have a great knowledge of the sea. And bringing scientists, fishermen and surfers together, it really gives a new dynamic. Or the role of a laboratory neighborhood for challenges about climate and social integration. So voila, that's what we did in Ostende, and how calling the public to get involved looked like. Workshops, for example, posters in the street, also a performance at the Grote Post, the main cultural center, at the Architecture Festival. Then I go to Brussels very shortly. It's something that's coming up, a Wetopia project in where we will fully work on the story of place through cultural heritage, because also history and future thinker are important to understand the place and its human and also natural system. Another example is Tunis. For example, in North of Africa, we already did a limited exercise in a part of the Medina at this space. But I just wanted to show you how we use system thinking and regenerative development frameworks to do this, such as, for example, nested systems of place. And then maybe another approach I wanted to show you is to start from a specific role. Like in our project, Marseille, Rotterdam, Antwerpen, we called a School of Will, entrepreneurs as catalysts for an inclusive society. And here we focus on one of those change makers' roles, entrepreneurs. And we develop a learning program to work towards a more inclusive society, not just a more inclusive company. And to do this, we draw on outstanding examples of entrepreneurs from these 3 port cities. And I just wanted to mention this because the role of entrepreneurs for nature-based solutions is not to underestimate as actors in greening sites, in greening minds, in greening cities. Also, field trips we set up in Marseille deeply dive in understanding a city that has 1/3 of its surface containing nature and still feels, for everyone who already visited Marseille, still feels like a blue but concrete jungle. And at the same time, has also the most square meters of urban farming. And some great European projects about air pollution, citizen science, nature and health. And yeah, since this week, also one of the 100 climate neutral cities of Europe, or the cities to become climate neutral by 2030. So also these kind of field trips really help to make these connections. And to end, because unfortunately I know the time is very limited, I just wanted to talk to you about people, because people are front runners in real change. Also, like on this summit, you had Jan Rotmans, Ignas Schops, Leen Gorissen. Today you will have the great Nikki Franciskaki also. And also in Wetopia, these real front runners are really necessary. And I want to introduce you to 2 of them and their work, because I think it's very relevant. Both in their own cities in South Africa and in Brazil, they are activists for new climate solutions, starting from people in the most deprived situations. And this is Kevin Kimwele, my colleague. He's a community architect and a researcher and a social innovator in sustainable development. And he began his architectural studies and his professional experience in Kenya, but his focus led him to community development in South Africa, where he is currently based. And with the communities, He builds schools, houses, crashes, and he does this from waste. So 95% of everything what he constructs is waste. Like here with 2,000 recycled wine bottles, for example, always in a Wetopia way with the communities and the rich blue-green natural environment. So Kevin, you really have to follow him. He's a great example. And last but not least, and some of you probably know him, I would like to present you to one of our great Wetopians, and that's Mundano. Mundano is an artivist, so artist activist, born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with worldwide recognition for his political graffiti, either in public space or, like you see here, on more than 300 carroças. So a carroça is a cart, a waste cart of the waste pickers, the catadores. So the project calls Pimp My Carroça. But I wanted to show you two recent murals he made. And these murals are a literal indictment of Bolsonaro's destruction of nature with enormous impact on this planet. And on the right-hand side, you can see a work that he made from the polluted mud that comes from a large company destroying nature near Sao Paulo. And he used the mud to make a whole range of shades of paint, and he painted this mural, this huge mural, with this mud. And he did the same, you see it at the left-hand side, with the ashes of burnt Amazonian forest, with in the middle a hero, in the middle a fireman, as an activist for saving nature. And that's how I want to end my story. I would like to come back to the manifesto and the statement. I said at the beginning, nature doesn't need our protection. She needs our collaboration between people to collaborate with nature. So my call would be, let's imagine cities that possess greater natural beauty, ecological health, productive capacity, maybe even more than the world's best kept forest. And let's do this together. So what would be your first step in this? That's my question. What kind of new alliances would you build for nature-based solution? I like to know, and I know the time is limited, so I also put my mail address. So I'm really happy to get your questions also this way, and I'm happy to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joke. Unfortunately, we had some delay this morning in the welcome. I think some people got difficult out of their beds this morning. So I didn't have the chance to introduce you. I'm sorry for that. But I still wanted to say thank you, because you started, well, you played an important role in the participation of City of Genk in connecting nature. I think with your keynote now, it's kind of a things come full closure, so thank you for that. But I also wanted to say it's a pity that you couldn't make it here in Genk. A lot of colleagues wanted to meet you, and I also wanted to talk to you because I think for the things we do in the Steamer Valley, we can relate to what you are doing. So maybe we have to do that another time. The time is very limited, but I don't know if there are questions online. No, there's a question here. I will go to the questionnaire.
Hello, Joke. I'm Fien.
Hi.
I've working a long time in Zwaarberg with pleasure and collaboration. Now I'm for the Gypsies, Horensberg.
Okay, great.
Maybe you can help me how to start there. Later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Fien.
Other questions? Because I think the answer for this question has to come in another time and another way.
And I certainly promise to come to Genk very soon. I will be much more in Belgium the next month, so we will set this up.
That would be great. There's one more question, and then I think we will close up.
Yeah.
Yes, hi. I have a question about continuïteit. How do you establish with your projects a long-term engagement with your participants? Because often we enter the scene as researchers, as policymakers, as scientists, or whatever. We do our participatory projects and then we leave. But at a certain moment, there comes the time to hand over the stick, or hopefully you have achieved enough ownership so that the participants take over your project and do their thing with it. How do you view that? Have you seen that within your work with Wetopia? Do you have experiences with that?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. It's a very important question and something very important for me. Because yes, I don't think participation or co-creation make any sense when it's not in the frame of a sustainable development. And that's why also this is more like a methodology and an approach and a way of looking at the world. But it's always with local communities we work. So we embed this in all our projects. That's why we work with local platform, with local communities to ensure. I give you one example. For example, in Ostende last year, we worked with 20 local partners, and they are developing now the next phase. So yeah, we talked a lot about it. We think a lot about it, but we really it's really important because if not, it doesn't have any use to go to a city. So it's really embedded in Wetopia. But I really want to talk more about this with you if you want on how we do this. With pleasure.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. And yeah, we'll see you at a later time, Joke. And we have your email address. So if there are any more questions or any more things to talk about, we know where to find you. Thank you.
Thank you.